Our protagonist was a 34-year-old shut-in, his life choices hanging over him like a very specific dark cloud. Specifically, the cloud of having skipped his own parents' funeral to watch uncensored lowly porn. Yes, that specific, that dark. His siblings, to their credit, gave him a sporting chance to reflect on his decisions before his younger brother demolished his computer with a wooden bat, and his older brother, who had, it turned out, a black belt in karate and a great deal of bottled frustration, beat the living daylights out of him. He was then escorted from the premises with nothing but the clothes on his back and a throbbing rib that probably wasn't broken but felt like it deserved to be. And so he found himself on the street, in the rain, having achieved exactly nothing in 34 years and recently been formally notified of this fact by his entire family. As he wandered aimlessly in the autumn chill, he reflected on how he had arrived here. The turning point, in retrospect, was high school, specifically the incident involving an upperclassman, a school gate, an unfortunate lack of clothing, and a series of photographs that circulated through the entire school overnight. The nickname that followed, let's just say it rhymed with stencil brick, had driven him indoors for a month, then a year, then considerably longer. He had developed hobbies. He had abandoned them all the moment he saw someone better than him. He had mocked the people online who at least tried to create things from the safety of having created nothing himself. And now here he was, 40 kilos overweight, in a sweatshirt caked with sweat, grime, and blood, unable to write a resume because he didn't have an address, and unable to get an address because he didn't have money, and unable to get money because he hadn't done anything in over a decade. While he was still processing this, he noticed a group of high schoolers engaged in a lover's quarrel near a busy road. The truck driver, heading toward them at full speed, asleep at the wheel, had made someone else's romantic drama significantly more urgent. Our protagonist tried to shout a warning, but 10+ years of barely speaking aloud had reduced his vocal cords to a pathetic squeak that was immediately lost in the sound of rain. So he ran instead, which his body was deeply unhappy about after a decade of disuse, his broken ribs screaming at him with every step. He managed to grab one of the boys and yank him out of the truck's path. He did not, however, successfully remove himself from the truck's path. He was struck, pinned against a concrete wall, crushed to a weight significantly less than 100 kilograms. The world faded. He managed one coherent thought before the end. Maybe a life that ends saving someone is worth more than a life that ended at a keyboard. He did not have time to decide if he actually believed that. He woke up to dazzling light and a blonde woman looking at him with a warm, confused smile. He tried to ask where he was and what was happening. What came out was, "Ah! Wah!" He could not move his body in any meaningful way. The brown-haired man beside the woman said something and picked him up effortlessly, which was absurd given that he had weighed over 100 kilos. Unless, and this thought arrived slowly and with significant emotional resistance, he no longer weighed over 100 kilos. Unless he was, in fact, significantly lighter than that. Unless he was, say, a baby. He spent the rest of the day with a single thought. This was going to be terrible. A month confirmed it. He had been reborn. He still had all his memories, which was either a blessing or a profound cosmic punishment, depending on how you looked at it. His new parents were younger than he'd been in his previous life, which made him irrationally jealous. They wore old-fashioned clothing, lived in a house lit by candles and oil lamps, and employed a maid who cleaned with a rag. No electronics, no internet, no way to order pizza. He had wished, wandering the rain-soaked streets of his old life, that he could go back and do everything over. He had not specified the terms. He would remember this lesson about specificity. 6 months in, he had mastered crawling and started picking up the language. The house turned out to be comfortably well off. 2 stories, 5 rooms, 1 maid, countryside location. He had clambered onto a chair to get a better look out the window when his father appeared in the yard below, swinging a sword around with the casual competence of a man who did this regularly. In the shock of seeing a real person with a real sword doing real sword things, he lost his grip on the chair and hit his head on the floor. His mother rushed over in a panic, touched his head, and used healing magic that actually worked. She mentioned, as if it were perfectly ordinary, that she used to be a famous adventurer. Magic existed. Swords existed. He was in a different world entirely. He lay there staring at the ceiling and decided, for the second time in recent memory, to live his life differently. This time, he actually meant it. The study on the second floor contained exactly 5 books. He read all of them. The interesting one was a textbook of magic, actual documentation of an actual thing that worked, which was more than he had expected from any book in his experience. It explained the 3 types of magic: attack, healing, and summoning. It explained that magical power was mostly inherited and essentially fixed at birth. It explained that spells could be cast through incantation or through magic circles. He absorbed all of this with the focus of a man who had nothing else to do except drool on himself, then held out his hand and recited the incantation for Waterball. A small sphere of water appeared in his palm. It fell on the floor. He had not expected it to work on the first try. He had absolutely not expected what happened next. Concentrating silently on the same image, without saying a single word, he conjured another one. Just like that. No incantation. He stared at this second water ball and said, "If it's that easy, what's the point of the incantation at all?" He worked it out eventually. Incantations were automatic transmissions. The spell process, genesis, size, speed, activation, happened in the correct order automatically when you said the words. Casting without incantation was like driving manual. You had to hold the whole sequence in your head yourself, but you could do it if you understood what you were doing. The book said nothing about silent spellcasting, which probably meant everyone got so used to incantations that they stopped bothering to find out whether they needed them. He filed this under potential advantages and kept practicing. The book also claimed that magical reserves were fixed at birth. He cast 5 water balls and passed out. He woke up having wet himself. His mother discovered him and gently suggested he use the toilet before practicing. She was not wrong. The next day he cast 6, then 11, then 26. He informed the textbook, silently, that it was incorrect. Using magic seemed to increase his capacity for magic, at least while he was still growing. He kept pushing his limits daily, casting spells until he was on the verge of blacking out, building his reserves through sheer repetitive stubbornness. 2 months later, through a mistake he couldn't quite reproduce intentionally, he managed to make a water ball fly. It soared across the room, struck the wall, and splashed satisfyingly. He finally understood what the size and speed regulation steps in the incantation were actually for. He felt, briefly, like he might actually be good at something for the first time in 2 lives. Meanwhile, the maid, Lilia, had been having a difficult time of it. She had once been a royal handmaiden and guardswoman at the Asura Palace, a position that ended when an assassin got to the newborn princess first and put a poisoned dagger into Lilia's leg in the process. The palace discharged her. She was no longer functional as a fighter, and in the murky world of succession politics, a former insider with nothing left to lose was a liability either way. She left the capital, travelled to the Fitoa region, and found a job posting from a low-ranking knight in the back end of nowhere named Paul Greyrat. She recognized the name. Paul was a former student of her swordmaster. She figured he'd help her if she needed it, or she could embarrass him into it if he didn't. She took the job. Paul and his pregnant wife Zenith welcomed her. The birth was smooth, and then the baby, Rudeus, did not cry. Lilia broke into a cold sweat. Children who didn't cry at birth, she had been told, tended to have a host of abnormalities. The baby eventually made some garbled noises, which helped, but then settled into a pattern of behavior that was not exactly reassuring. He never cried or made a fuss. He crawled everywhere and disappeared whenever unobserved, somehow making his way to every room, including the second floor. He was always smiling. The same smile whether he was staring at vegetables, a candle flame, or unwashed undergarments. And when Lilia picked him up, his nostrils would flare, he would bury his face against her chest, and he would make weird, gleeful little giggles. It was, she decided, the same smile as a particular cabinet minister who had purchased young women as slaves. She was bodily at risk from an infant. She spent money she didn't really have on a traditional charm of banishment. She performed it while the Greyrats were asleep. The next day, the baby smiled at her the same as before. Of course, it didn't work. She lived in fear of him for about a year. And then, gradually, the behavior changed. Rudeus started spending all his time in Paul's study, sitting with the books and muttering to himself. He stopped disappearing. He stopped burying his face in her chest. Lilia stood at the door one day and watched him stare at a book with an expression she could only describe as genuine concentration, and felt, strangely, none of her usual revulsion. There was something earnest there. Determined, she decided to leave him alone. It was odd, leaving an infant alone. But there was intelligence in his eyes now, and the creepy aura had, for reasons she couldn't explain, mostly gone. She did not think too hard about why. 2 years after his reincarnation, Rudeus could walk and speak. He had a plan: study, exercise, technique, the 3 things he had failed to prioritize in his previous life. His magical reserves had grown significantly through daily practice. He kept the training secret, practicing out the window when no one was watching, uncertain about this world's views on children using magic. He had mostly succeeded in remaining secret. Right up until the afternoon, he ran an intermediate tier spell. Water Cannon, size 1, speed 0, which he had expected to produce a manageable quantity of water, and instead blasted a hole through the wall of sufficient diameter to confirm that magical theory and magical practice had a significant gap between them. Paul ran in looking for a monster. Zenith walked in, looked at the textbook, looked at Rudeus, crouched to his eye level with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and asked if he had been saying words from that book out loud. He apologized. She exploded with joy. Paul wanted him raised as a knight. Zenith wanted him trained as a mage. This argument was resolved by Lilia, the maid, in approximately 45 seconds, by suggesting he study magic in the morning and practice swordplay in the afternoon. Both parents agreed. Rudeus reflected that the most competent person in the household was someone neither of them had thought to ask. A home tutor was hired. Given that they were in a rural border village with no mages guild, no inn, and minimal infrastructure, Paul and Zenith braced themselves for whoever was willing to come out this far. In their minds, a retired adventurer, probably elderly, probably bearded, probably the kind of wizard who had seen things. What arrived at the door was a young girl, maybe of junior high age, with blue hair braided neatly, brown robes, white skin apparently untouched by the sun, and eyes that radiated the particular scorn of someone who has already decided this is going to be a waste of their time. "I'm Roxy. It's a pleasure to meet you." Paul and Zenith stared at her in the silence of people confronting a significant gap between expectation and reality. Rudeus looked at her from Zenith's arms. Underage, scornful eyes. Socially awkward. The trifecta. He wanted her to be his bride. He was a reincarnated 34-year-old in a toddler's body. His priorities were admittedly complicated. His parents fumbled with their words. Paul managed a half-formed "aren't you a little" before trailing off. Rudeus finished the sentence for him. "You're little." Roxy snapped back immediately. "Hey, you're sure one to talk." Touchy subject. She looked around for the actual student, because surely this baby couldn't be it. Zenith cheerfully introduced Rudeus as the genius in question and bounced him slightly. Rudeus gave Roxy a cheeky wink. Her eyes went wide. She sighed. "Ugh, this happens sometimes," she muttered. "Kid shows signs of growing up a little fast, and the damn parents get it into their heads that he's got a special talent." She said this at a volume he could clearly hear. He heard it. He said nothing, because he was occasionally wise. Zenith, radiating the invincible confidence of a mother who has decided her child is exceptional, insisted he was brilliant. Roxy sighed again, already establishing this as her signature move, and agreed to do what she could south, with all the enthusiasm of someone accepting a very long unpaid internship. Their first lesson outside ended with a snapped tree, Roxy's fault, demonstrating water ball with rather more force than the yard required. A restored tree, also Roxy's doing, performed while red-faced and straining because Zenith appeared at that exact moment and was not pleased. Then Rudeus's turn came. He had been practicing for almost 2 years without incantation, and he had not been using incantations then either. He cast water ball, toppling the same tree. Roxy went still. You cut your incantation off, didn't you? He explained that he didn't use incantations. At all. Her eyes went wide with what he read as shock mixed with the very specific recalculation of someone who had expected a wasted afternoon. She muttered, quietly but not quietly enough, "Maybe it is worth training this kid." When Zenith's scream upon discovering the state of her tree left Roxy sitting on the ground drawing little circles in the dirt, convinced she was about to be fired on day one, Rudeus stood next to her and patted her on the shoulder. He had not had a real conversation with anyone in close to 20 years, 2 lives combined, and the words didn't come easily. But he found them. "You didn't fail here, miss." Roxy looked up. "You just earned some more experience, that's all." She blinked. "Yes, you're right, thank you." He said, "Uh-huh, so could you please continue with our lesson?" And just like that, from day one, something formed between them. Not the wise sage and humble apprentice dynamic he had imagined. Something stranger, more awkward, and considerably more likely to result in collateral tree damage. But real. For a reincarnated shut-in and a socially awkward junior mage from the outer provinces, that was more than enough.